And within seconds, and I'm not exaggerating, but within seconds, I started to empty reach. There was a smell. Satchwell convinced a lot of people that he was innocent, members of the public. But from day one, the guards knew that he was the man who murdered his wife. The disappearance of Tina Satchwell sparked one of the biggest Garda investigations this country has ever witnessed. Her husband Richard was subsequently convicted of her murder and jailed for life. Southern Correspondent with the Irish Independent, Ralph Riegel, along with myself, have co-authored a book called Beneath the Stairs. Ralph, Richard Satchwell, the crime itself, brutal beyond words.
It is. It's one of those thankfully rare murder cases where there's a level of cruelty, a level of cynicism, coercive control that's extraordinary to the point of being shocking. I mean, there were aspects of this case that are almost unbelievable, but actually happened. And what makes this case so particularly high profile, I think, is the level of engagement between Richard and the media from when Tina disappeared. She vanished in March of 2017. Richard didn't report Tina missing for 4 days.
That was a red flag straight away.
Immediately, from the very beginning, there were aspects of this Tina's disappearance that just didn't gel. Richard's behaviour, so many different things happened that made Gardaí look long and hard at the truth of what he was saying. But her body wasn't actually located for 6.5 years. And over that period, Richard's engagement, some would actually argue almost obsession with the media.
I have heard Satchwell being described as a media whore.
Yeah, it's very hard to argue against that. I mean, if you go back 20, 30 years in Ireland, I mean, the parallels that are drawn between this case are the case that are drawn with Joe O'Reilly and the murder of his wife in Dublin. That here's a man, was guilty of a very brutal crime and yet had the audacity, the brazenness to appear on national television and to appeal for help and almost to try and create an alternative reality of how his wife disappeared. But I would argue that in the case of Richard Satchwell, it goes to such extremes. I mean, here's a man who killed his wife, buried her in a secret grave underneath the stairs of their home, staged what he claimed to be a special service of remembrance for her, that she would have like a proper funeral, buried her face down, wrapped in plastic. Within days began to sell all of her prized possessions, lied to her family, lied to the Gardaí, lied to the Irish people through innumerable media interviews. In fact, of all of the journalists that dealt with Richard Satchwell, you had the closest working relationship with him. He would speak to you, Paul, over the years when he wouldn't speak to other journalists.
Do you think, Ralph, was he getting his kicks out of playing a game with the media, playing a game with the guards, playing a game with the public?
There's certainly some people that believe that. I mean, some have argued that was he trying to convince himself of an alternative truth? In other words, trying to persuade himself that he wasn't guilty of the level of behaviour that he actually knew he was guilty of? Or was it that he just enjoyed being in the limelight, he enjoyed the attention, he would drive to radio studios, he would drive to television studios in Dublin, he would regularly make appeals. I mean, his level of engagement with the media was truly extraordinary. And what was unique about that level of engagement was he loved broadcast. So he loved radio stations and he loved television stations, always saying he was only doing it to help the Gardaí, but had such an extraordinary level of engagement. But he disliked newspapers and he disliked the printed media. Was that because he didn't get the level of focus in newspapers that he did in, say, a live broadcast interview?
At one stage, members of Tina's family contacted me and I got a message to say, stop giving him oxygen, stop giving him airtime. However, a Garda source said, keep him talking, keep him talking. The guard said, if he's going to sing, let him sing from the rooftops. They wanted him to talk and trip himself up.
Very much so. And I think that's a very important point to make, is that when you looked at the Central Criminal Court trial, which took place in April, And May of this year, of course, he was sentenced to the mandatory life term the first week in June for the murder of his wife Tina. I mean, the media interviews were an absolutely integral part of that 6-week trial. There was 6 major interviews played as part of the prosecution case. I think 3 of those interviews were by yourself, Paul. So it was a huge part of the prosecution case that here was a man brazen enough to say these things to the media, to say these things to Gardaí in formal interviews, and then suddenly, once his wife's body is located and recovered, he changes his story and he asks everybody to suddenly believe him now. And that was a core part of the prosecution case.
Satchwell convinced a lot of people that he was innocent, members of the public. But from day one, the guards knew that he was the man who murdered his wife. I mean, you can fool a lot of people. You don't fool the guards.
No, in fairness to the Gardaí, right from the word go, I think there were just too many red flags. Why would a person wait 4 days to report their wife missing? And I think it's important to say, anybody who's watching this, I mean, we're talking about a couple that were rarely seen apart. If you saw Tina on the streets of Fermoy or Youghal, inevitably she was with her husband.
He was like a shadow.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that the book, I think, brings out, is the level of coercive control that he subjected her to. And a friend once explained to me, he said, it's a bit like every person having a single piece of the jigsaw. Nobody has enough pieces to say what the image is, but they still have clues. And in this particular case, it was just the level of obsession that Richard Satchwell seemed to have with his wife. I mean, he said he loved her, but obsession and love, they're two totally different things. And the fact that he even buried the body at home, he wasn't allowing, and he wasn't going to dispose of it elsewhere. He was going to hold on to her no matter what. Yeah. Tina's family have maintained that even in death, he wanted to maintain control of her, that he wanted her buried close by, that he would have control over Tina. The control that he felt he was losing in life, he wanted to maintain in death. And again, to bring out the level of coercive control, if Tina went to the doctors for
a checkup,
issues or checkups to do with, say, female issues, her husband still went with her. If she went to the beauticians and she had to wait, he would sit on the windowsill outside the beauticians, looking in to see that she was in the waiting room. Who was she talking with? People in Fermoy told me that if they met there were 2 different Tinas. There was the Tina that you'd meet on her own in the street, a bright, bubbly, friendly, kind-hearted woman. And then there was the Tina you would meet if her husband was beside her. And she was a very different individual, almost as if she was conscious of the level of engagement she would have with other people. And her family maintained that Richard exploited issues with disputes within the family to isolate Tina from her devoted and loving family, who have been remarkable throughout this. They've shown incredible courage and dignity. And then even to the point that when he felt that she was slipping from him, he engineered a move to Youghal. Tina didn't drive, so she was entirely dependent on her husband for logistics. And another very important point, all of the financial accounts were in Richard's name. So he had effectively logistical travel control over his wife, but he also had financial control over her as well.
She must have lived a horrific life.
Yeah, one of her family members said to me that there was a question asked about had her family visited them in the Grattan Street house. And she said, no, Tina was very house proud. And Tina wanted the house to be perfect before her family came down to see the house in Youghal. And I think the truth is that the house in Youghal was horrendous. I mean, you've seen, probably best if you describe what the house is like, Paul.
I went there with a cameraman to do an interview with Satchwell, and it was grand. We were given access to the house, and within seconds, and I'm not exaggerating, but within seconds, I started to empty reach. There was a smell. It was filthy. Your civic amenity sites are spotless compared to what I witnessed and what I experienced down there. And I just said, we're out of here. We did the interview outside. I just cannot understand how he lived in conditions in there. It was absolutely horrific. And you know what? Looking back, those animals he had, they were living in filth and dirt. It's so sad. I mean,
it's one of the things that was.
Honest to God, I describe him as an animal, a pure evil man.
It's one of the extraordinary things that was brought out in the trial, because of course you had photographic evidence, you had mapping evidence, which are integral parts of every murder trial, to detail the location of the property where the body was found. But you actually get the impression from multiple Garda sources of the filth that he was living in. Extraordinary to describe to people. When you came into the house, there was photographs during the search in October 2023. We were both outside the property when the Gardaí were conducting the invasive search, which actually led to the recovery of Tina's body. There was a cement mixer in the sitting room. There was books, papers, there was bags of rubbish all over the place. But my abiding memory of the description of the property during the murder trial was that there was dog filth everywhere. There was dog filth on the stairs, on the floors. There was actually petrified dog poo on the sofa that he would sit on in the evening time and have his dinner.
Every time I met him, there was a smell off him. Honestly, and I don't want to upset viewers, but that was the reality. There was this horrible, horrible smell. And he was dirty, honestly. And I remember one night in particular, we went for a bite to eat. I wasn't interviewing him, but I would meet him from time to time just to keep the lines of communication open with him at all times. And we came out of the Keys bar in Youghal, and we were chatting and saying goodnight and thank you very much indeed. No interviews had been conducted, no, it was just having a chat. And I remember he looked at me and he said, "Paul, you know," and I can remember clearly to this day, he said, "I have a terrible feeling wherever she is, she's nearby." And at that, he looked out into the sea, at the sea. And I said, "She must be out there." He disposed of her body in the sea, but not realising that she was just yards from where we were at the time. Yeah. And when the search was taking place at Mitchell's Wood in Castlemartyr, I remember calling him to say, would he come over and do an interview? And he said, "Grand, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And I put down the phone, and then I realised he never asked me where we were. But now I know that he had been casing the place that afternoon. Right. He had been passing, he had found out where we were. But also I understand that for 110%, Gardaí are 110% sure, at some stages, he had been to Mitchell's Wood. And they're now that's why they carried out this massive, massive search of Mitchell's Wood. And they're wondering then at that time, was he there? Had he buried the body? But they know he had been there. Was he there to dispose of the body, or had he been planning to bring her to Mitchell's Wood to murder her? Because they had received information, intelligence, witnesses saw him there, and that's why they carried out the site. But he did come to Mitchell's Wood, he did the interview, he was very, very upset on camera. And once the camera stopped rolling, I changed the subject, and I just noticed that he had purchased a new car.
Right.
And I said, "I see you're driving a new car." And like that,
right.
he went into upbeat. He said, "I bought that this afternoon. Yeah. It's this, it's that. I got it. I traded this in, one in." And then I said, "Lovely, lovely." And then I said, "Can I bring you across the road? I need to take some shots of you looking through the railings and the plastic sheeting that had been up."
Yes, yeah.
And like that again, the tears started to roll.
Right.
This might sound strange. To me, he was an actor.
Right.
If there's a drama group in the prison, he should get the lead part. The man deserves an Oscar, but a despicable character. In fact, to this day, he's taking offence to headlines in the papers about him. He's more upset being called a monster, being called perverted, being called despicable. These words are hurting him, yet he murdered somebody.
And it's extraordinary, Paul. Again, I mean, it's interesting listening to you there, because, you know, we all had our suspicions, but we all, I think, also grappled with the believability, the credibility of his interviews, because he had displayed such enormous emotion about the whole thing. But I don't think we can get away from the facts of the case, as well as when you realise that having killed his wife, he claims he spent the night lying beside her body and missing her. He then panicked about what he would do, and he placed her body in a chest freezer for a couple of days while he excavated this grave beneath the stairs, as the book title goes, in his property. And then it's almost to the point of cruelty beyond belief. He then offered the chest freezer to a member of Tina's family.
To me, that describes how evil he is.
Yeah, why would someone, having robbed a family of someone as bright and bubbly as Tina, having betrayed all of your vows of loyalty and having someone's back, to then turn around and offer her the chest freezer that held her body to her family? And not only that, but the stories, again, the book deals with a lot of this, is that he having killed Tina, he then really tried to kill her reputation as well. I mean, he raised this whole thing about her having an affair with a Polish man. He then claimed that she had run off with 26,000 euros in cash. And it was extraordinary. I mean, the guards had to get a forensic accountant to go through their accounts. And they had, I think it was 360 something euros to their name. That they were absolutely broke. They were living hand to mouth. And yet here's this man fabricating stories about 26,000 euros in cash that his wife had stolen from their life savings. And while he's telling all of these stories, he's willingly giving media interviews. In some extraordinary photographs with some of the tabloid newspapers, he posed inside the house holding one of Tina's shoes and a bottle of cava, that he would open the bottle of cava when she came home safe, when she was already buried under the stairs just a couple of metres away.
Tell the viewers, because it's in the book, he dug the hole, he dug the grave. How did he dispose of the bits of concrete, the gravel and the debris?
Yeah, the excavated debris. Again, it's almost beyond belief that having excavated this grave underneath the stairs, he wrapped Tina's body in heavy-duty plastic that they would use as part of their car boot sale operations. He buried her face down, which, again, it's an incredible insult to someone, to a body, to treat a body in that fashion. And then he came up with this story that he wanted to make it seem like a proper funeral. So Tina's favourite flowers were roses. He couldn't get roses, so he threw tulips into the grave before he filled it. And to answer your question, he kept the debris, and no one realised this until subsequent interviews after Tina's body had been found, that he spread the debris around some of the locations in Youghal that his wife and himself would most frequently have visited, including the dunes where he had proposed to her when she was just a year after they had first met. Of course, Richard met Tina in England. She had gone to England in her teens to basically get a job, forge a new life for herself. And it was just misfortunate for the girl that, having arrived over there, staying with her grandmother, that just a couple of days later she met Richard Satchwell. And, Lorraine Howard, Tina's half-sister, said that, the tragedy for Tina was that she could never get away from him, that she could never escape this man that she met.
A very sad story, really, really sad story. He's jailed, he's in prison for the rest of his life. As cases go, this was one of the most horrific.
I think so, Paul. I think every murder is awful. The loss of every life in violent circumstances is something to be mourned and something to be shocked over. Particularly in modern society, we see far too much of it. But I think it's just the level of detail, it's the level of deception, the level of betrayal. I mean, coercive control is something that we're becoming more and more aware of in modern society. And I would think that in Irish terms, I can't think of an example of coercive control taken to a more extreme and tragic level than was displayed by Richard Satchwell towards his wife Tina.
This is the book Beneath the Stairs. It's dedicated to the memory of Tina, and we're going to use her maiden name for this, Tina Dingivan. It's dedicated to her memory, and to anybody in a relationship, a violent relationship. Our advice is to reach out and contact someone. Ralph, what will people take from the book?
Well, hopefully what people will take from it is that, first of all, it will set the record straight as regards the type of person that Tina was, that she was not the person that her husband portrayed during the trial, basically in an attempt to save his own skin. And secondly, as you say, Paul, that hopefully it will serve as an alert or an awareness to families and to people in relationships where there may be elements of coercive control, to be very much aware of the signs. It can be subtle, but that people should be aware of it. And that, as you said, quite eloquently, there are supports there. People reach out, there is help available, and that's what you really have to do in circumstances like that.
Ralph, thank you.
My pleasure.